Lord. Toph, good evening. Oh, I want to make sure I have this available also. Yeah, sorry. And this. Okay. Um, we haven't been together for just a couple weeks now. Let me tell you what I'd like to do. I talked about it last time just as an introduction, but I have to repeat this because otherwise it might be lost. The last few classes we dealt with the Golden Age of Spain, and we got as far as the Mechaber, the author of the Shulchan Aruch, Rabbi Yosef Karo, and we discussed what his job, what he did, how he first authored the Beit Yosef, which is the commentary on the Torah, and how which was massive, and then he made it small and he put it into an organized fashion, and wrote what we now know is called the Shulchan Aruch. Word Shulchan Aruch means the set table, the arranged table, which we'll see why it's important to know that in a little while if we get there tonight. And then we said we're going to jump over into the Ashkenazi world for a little while, because in order to understand the Shulchan Aruch and understand what it became for us in our lives, we also have to understand who the Rama was. The Rama was the Ashkenazi posek, a decider of halacha, who added his opinions of the Ashkenazi world to the mostly Sephardi work of Rabbi Yosef Karo. Together, actually, I don't have to wait till later, I'll tell you now. He's called the Shulchan Aruch. The author is called the Mechaber, or the author. He's also known as the Shulchan Aruch. And Rabbi Yosef Karo is known as the Mapa. The Mapa, in meaning the word tablecloth, not a map, but a tablecloth. Because if the Shulchan Aruch was laid out in an organized fashion by Rabbi Yosef Karo, then the Rama, Rabbi Moshe Isserlis, who we're going to learn about tonight, put the tablecloth. That was his donation, so to speak, his contribution rather, to the author of the Shulchan Aruch. So therefore, together, there's the Shulchan Aruch means the combination both of the words of the Mechaber, the original author, Rabbi Yosef Karo, the additions of the Rama, Rabbi Moshe Isserlis. But in order to understand what we learned about Rabbi Yosef Karo, we had to go back to basically the expulsion of the Jews from England, then the expulsion of the Jews from Spain, which he was one of them, and then we went into his biography. In a very similar fashion, we're going to have to do something like that in order to understand who the Rama was, Rabbi Moshe Isserlis was. So we're going to do a little bit of history that's not exactly just Jewish history, but history, because our history doesn't happen in a vacuum. Okay, so we're going to go back to discuss the history of the Jews of Poland, because Rabbi Yosef Karo was in Krakow, and the Renaissance, the time period of the Renaissance, what that was, how it influenced Jews, how it then brought about masterful works such as that of the Rama. The time period, now some of you may think back to, I don't know if it's lovingly necessarily, to your high school days or potentially your college days, when you learned world history and learned about the time period of the Renaissance. The time period of the Renaissance is about a 300-year span from the mid 1300s to the mid 1600s, so the 14th to the 17th centuries. The word Renaissance is from the word from French, which just means rebirth. Well, it's a kind of a strange word when you think about it, because rebirth means born again, but rebirth of what? What was reborn and in what sense? So we need to understand just a little bit of that time period for us to begin to understand our own history. The time period that comes before the Renaissance that's in Europe is known as the Dark Ages. It was repressive and mostly due to the Church of Rome. If you remember a little bit, we talked about how pretty much Rome and the Church ran everything in Europe, in the Christian-dominated world. That even though there was a king of a country such as France, he was subservient to the Pope, and he was considered an agent of God if he was appointed the king, but the Pope still was the top authority, and the Catholic Church dictated what could and could not happen in the country, and it superseded what the king would say. It was repression of individual expression. You couldn't have your own ideas if they went against the Catholic Church. Worldly experience, scholarship, literature, science, arts, all that was repressed during the time period of the Dark Ages. And with the Renaissance, the rebirth, it's the rebirth of knowledge. Generally speaking, we talk about the Renaissance and the rebirth, you're talking about knowledge. And what it is exactly the opposite of what I was just saying. Individual expression, self-consciousness, worldly experience, arts, sciences, literature, medicine. There was an explosion of this. There are some very powerful kings that came out of this time period, and the power of the church at this time period starts to wane. Now, it's nice to talk about the time period, but there are some names that you all know, at least some of these names. Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci, Shakespeare, one of my love his works, Machiavelli, Descartes, Copernicus. You start to think about some of these things. I had a discussion with somebody not that long ago, a teenager. They said, if someone died, let's say in 1700, they never knew what electricity was. If someone died before 1500, they never knew what a printed book was. These are things that we take for granted. Keep in mind that the only books that have been printed are only the most about 500 years old, a little bit more, and that's it. Everything else is handwritten. So we take for granted that our world had someone like Copernicus, and they had someone like a Shakespeare and Michelangelo, these magnificent human beings. By the way, the Gemara says in many places, "Chochma b'goyim ta'amin." If you find wisdom among the non-Jewish world, believe it. No, you go, it's just a bunch of goyim. God forbid. I mean, that's they're also created in the image of God, and they also were able to give a tremendous amount to modern times, both modern and then, and it's still to this very day. I mean, think about all these names that I mentioned, and whether they contributed in the area of arts, in literature, in politics, Machiavelli, Descartes, all these names, and Copernicus and science, all these things had a very big influence in the world in general. And then we have to see, what did this do for the Jews, right? There's the old line, is it good for the Jews or bad for the Jews? The answer is yes. We're going to see. Because it's during this time period where Jews first start to make their way. We're going to take a look at a couple maps soon. Start to make their way to Poland. And if you ask the average Jew, tell me what you know about Jews in Poland and the Polish history, they're going to pretty much go to the 1800s. They're going to go to the shtetls and the pogroms and all the other things. But the truth is that Jews find their way to Poland much earlier than the 1800s, because all the bad stuff that we really associate with Poland is really only starting in the late 1700s. So we got to put that little preconceived notion of Polish Jewry out of our minds for right now, because during the time period of the Renaissance, the picture for the Jews in Poland was very different. Now, how did they get there? So in order to understand that, we have to talk about a pattern. Generally speaking, and this is true up until this very day, the places where Jews do the best and things are the best for the Jews always end up being the place where the Jews tend to suffer the worst in the end. Whether it's been in England, whether it's been Spain, Poland, Germany, it's a pattern in Jewish history that repeats itself over and over. Baruch Hashem, not in Israel, Baruch Hashem, but everywhere in the diaspora, we see this as a story that repeats itself over and over. Remember, the Golden Age of Spain, things were fantastic for the Jews. The Ibn Ezra and the Rambam and all. And what happens? Get kicked out. England, things are great for the Jews. They get kicked out. Germany, we don't have to tell you, but German Jews, they were the top, they were the cream of the crop, and they were in politics, they were in literature, they were in academia, and along comes the Holocaust, they suffer the worst. Hungary, things were great. Hungarian Jews were considered the last victims of the Holocaust for various reasons, which we will talk about when we do the Holocaust. So, but right now we're talking about the beginning step when the Jews are first stepping into Poland. So how do they get there? Keep in mind, we have to go back just a tiny bit, that during the time period of the Dark Ages and the Crusades, things weren't so good for the Jews. You remember, we talked about that already also. So how do they come to Poland? So Poland becomes Christian at actually a very late stage, relatively speaking, only at the beginning of the 11th century, like the 1000s, around the time of the Crusaders, actually. But it really starts taking a couple hundred years for Poland as a country starts to emerge as a nation state, a country, I'm not sure what the right word is, with very strong potential for developing into something powerful. Now, if you want to develop your country economically, you want to develop culturally, what do you need? Answer, you need Jews. Why? Why are the Jews always, and we saw this already in Spain, we saw it in England, and we're now going to see it in Poland. Why? Why the Jews, who represent such a tiny, infinitesimal portion of human beings on planet Earth? Why are they always necessary in order to be able to bring culture and economics to a country, to raise it up to the next level? Simple. We're talking about a time period of history still back then where the average person was absolutely illiterate and uneducated. Jews have always been known as, quote, the people of the book. Jews could read, Jews could write, Jews were educated, and somehow they were always involved in finance, banking, accountants, administrators. They understood economic health and wealth. And in order to increase the cultural awareness, increase the economic balance within a community and a country, every country seems to have always gone to their Jews, which of course leads to Jews control the media, Jews control Hollywood, Jews control the banks. Okay, we do. It seems that way. But when they're saying it, it's actually very anti-Semitic. In any case, so how did they come to Poland? There's a king who's known as, it's spelled Boleslav. It's actually pronounced Bowisław. Don't ask me why I know that. In 1264, he grants a charter inviting Jews to the country. This is also right around the time when Jews are getting kicked out of England. So it's a good timing. The charter was an amazing document. I'm going to share it with you. I'm going to show you on the screen. Let me put it on the screen. Share. Wow. See if I get the right one. Okay, let me make this a little bigger. I'm going to read some of these things. This is an absolutely unbelievable document for this time period of history. Keeping in mind, Jews have been bumped out of here and kicked out of there, literally kicked and figuratively kicked. So this is the King Boleslav in 1264 writes the following edict or charter. It's not even an edict. The testimony of the Christian alone may not be admitted in a matter which concerns the money or property of a Jew. In every such incident, there must be the testimony of both a Christian and a Jew. If a Christian injures a Jew in any way, the accused shall pay a fine to the royal treasury. Well, this is gigantic already. First, it doesn't get paid to the Jew, which is interesting, but it's admitting that the Christian is responsible for causing injury to a Jew. Why is it so important? Remember, we're still in the middle of the time period, the latter part of the Crusades, where Christians that's their fun and games. They're injuring Jews, they're killing Jews. Next, if a Christian desecrates or defiles a Jewish cemetery in any which way, it is our wish that he be punished severely as demanded by law. Meaning, one of the things to this very day, we just saw it the other day in I don't think it was Montreal, it wasn't Australia, but pick your city of the week, where headstones are turned over, there was swastikas on headstones. It's nothing new. I told you this already. There's absolutely nothing new that they're doing today or that did during the Holocaust that wasn't done centuries before. So it was a common thing when you want to really slap the Jews in the face, or any people, you defile their cemetery. So doing that, a Christian who does that will be punished. If a Christian should attack a Jew, the Christian shall be punished as required by the laws of the land. We absolutely forbid anyone to accuse the Jews in our domain of using the blood of human beings. What's that? What's that come from? We already saw this. We saw the idea of what was called a blood libel, which is very common just during this time period until this very day as well, that the Jews need to slaughter a Christian baby, use its blood to make matzahs. How they came up with this idea, they also came up with the concept of desecration of the host. Again, If you accused a Jew of doing, now, if God forbid a Jew did that, then he'd be punished. But because it's absolutely, as they say, lo haya v'lo nivra, never was such a thing. To accuse a Jew of using the blood of a human being for something, such as the making matzah, was punishable. By a Christian would be punished for that. Finally, we affirm, I don't know if it's finally, yes, finally, we affirm that if any Jew cries out in the night as a result of violence done to him, and if his Christian neighbors fail to respond to his cries and do not bring the necessary help, they shall be fined. Again, history repeats itself. I'm sure you all remember there was multiple incidents, especially in the old city here in the last few years, where Jews were assaulted, were shot in the old city. And there's videos of Arabs standing by and watching, no one doing anything. So again, nothing new under the sun. We're going to take a look at a map in a minute, but first I'm going to go back into our a little bit more background. We're going to take a little map. So this document was absolutely amazing. We also saw before that in earlier times that if a nobleman wanted a debt to be annulled, what did he do? He'd bring a blood libel. Remember, that was one of the key factors in this blood libel first starting up. Guy said, the Jew did something to me. By the way, I happen to owe the Jew, 10,000, whatever it would be. Well, he's going to get executed. And I'm going to have my debt going to be wiped out. So that's one of the promises that Boleslav made, that he would not permit blood libels. And again, what is this doing? He's not just making this charter. He's making it so that the Jews will feel not only welcome to come to Poland, but safe. Now, is he doing it altruistically because he loved the Jews so much? Not necessarily. He did it because he needed the Jews. He needed them there. Now, is it also altruistic? Maybe. I don't have enough knowledge to be able to tell you one with the other. But the truth is that even after he made this charter and allowed the Jews to come, invited the Jews, made life somewhat easier, Jews didn't right away flock to Poland. What really started, there were some that would test the waters, but really started it was when the Jews were starting to be expelled. I told you that the charter was written, I think it was 1264, I said, and just a few years later, the Jews are being thrown out of England, Germany, in the 14th century, Italy and Portugal, which we haven't even talked about, later, also in the 15th century. So therefore, Poland became a destination point, an attractive one. So we start to also see the interconnection between different activities in history. You can learn about the Jews getting kicked out of Spain. You can look at about before that, a couple hundred years before, the Jews got kicked out of England. But now you start to see what are the ramifications for that. Ramifications are the Jews now go to another country, i.e. in this case, Poland, where they are going to flourish. And it's going to be almost a golden age of Polish Jewry, as we'll talk about. And no, Poland isn't Miami. It's not that kind of a destination, but it becomes a much more attractive destination. And not only running from something, possibly for the first time, they're running to something also. Because in the past, when they were kicked out of other places, it was uncertainty. When the Jews get kicked out of one place, they have to run somewhere. They run to where they think they're going to be safe, and they're not necessarily safe, and they're there for maybe a century or two, and they're gone again, which will happen eventually. We know that eventually Polish Jewry is going to be destroyed. But what happens is in the year 1569, I don't usually do a lot with dates, but I'm just mentioning so you have a historical context of timing. Poland unifies with Lithuania. We're going to take a look at a map in a minute, which results in the expanding of their borders. Now, why is that significant for us? I'll show you. Oops, here. Okay, let me make this a little bigger. Okay. Poland and Lithuania combine makes a much larger area of land. What happens when you have more land? You need people to take care of that. It's nice to have more land. What happens though? What do you do with that land? So No, that's not what I want. So just to get a slight insight into how massive the amount of land we're talking about, um, what do you do with this land? You need people to work the land. Well, you can't just put a want ad in the paper and expect people are going to start showing up. It doesn't work that way. So they had a system that was put into place. The land itself needed to be managed. So yes, there were job openings, so to speak, which had to do with administration because you had to administer the lands. You had to do with the actual agricultural work that had to be taken care of. So what would happen? They created a situation where Jews would lease tracts of land from the Polish nobility. The Polish nobility still controlled property, the land itself, so that the Jews became the middleman in what was called the feudal system, Feudal. Again, I hear some of these words. I think back to my world history class in 6th grade with a teacher who I just didn't particularly care for, let's just say. But it's true. There was a feudal system. And so the Jew became the middleman between the Polish nobility and the people working the land. There's words arenda, arendata, which is just Polish for rental. So they'd be rental, people be rented, the land be rented, but it was more of a what we would call today a lease. And this enabled the Jew to have an amazing growth. We haven't talked yet at all about scholarship and arts and literature and the Jewish world. Right now, we're just talking economics and how the Jews end up becoming a part of the economic system of Poland and Lithuania. Along comes another king. His name is Sigismund II Augustus. Okay, it's kind of an interesting name considering he is in Poland, having the name Augustus. He sends out another invitation. And in this invitation, he's granting an amazing step for the Jews. This is very important to hear this. This is now the mid 1500s, 1567. And he writes the following. This will be a little bit of one little foot into this story of the Rama. Rama stands for Rav Moshe Isserlich. We'll see that later. He says, Sigismund the Augustus says as follows: as a result of the efforts of our advisors, and in keeping with the request of the Jews of Lublin, we do hereby grant permission to erect a yeshiva and to outfit said yeshiva with all that is required to advance learning. All the learned men and rabbis of Lublin shall come together, for among their number they shall choose one to serve as the head of the yeshiva. Let their choice be a man who will magnify Torah and bring it glory. Now, this is written by a non-Jewish king who understood the value of Torah. This is already during the latter part of the Rama's life in Krakow. He doesn't live much longer after this. But it is the Polish king who enables in Lublin for what becomes eventually known as Yeshivat Chachmei Lublin, which eventually is taken over by the Nazis, Yamach Shemam, as a headquarters for their working in this part of the world during World War II. I've been in Yeshivat Chachmei Lublin. It was a yeshiva, then it was a headquarters for the Nazis, and then it became a school, a nursing school. I was there, I don't remember what year it was, on one of my rabbi trips to the Eastern Europe. It was, without exaggeration, about 420,000 degrees below zero. And that's not an exaggeration. And Rabbi Gedalia Dov Schwartz Zatzal, who was the Av Beit Din of the CRC, Chicago Rabbinical Council, and the Rabbinical Council of America, tremendous tzaddik. He was on a trip, and one of his jobs on this trip was to learn Torah with us. So he brought a source sheet, and we stood in this yeshiva we're talking about right now, which became known eventually as the Yeshivat Chachmei Lublin, and he taught Torah. So I was able to say I learned the Yeshivat Chachmei Lublin. A little bit young for that, but it worked. But what did that do? What is this? It shows us something about the value of the Jew, not only economically. Now we see that the upper crust, the king of the area of Poland/Lithuania, they were using our modern day names of countries because they had different names actually, understood the importance of the Jew more than just the economic importance, which is going to lead to this, what we will call, it's not the same thing as the golden age of Spain. Definitely not. But the golden age of, say, Polish Jewry to an extent. In this time, in the early 16th century, meaning just prior to this edict giving a charter to the Yeshiva Chachmei Lublin, is the beginning of something that is we'll talk about in a few minutes, which, because it's its own topic, something called the Va'ad Arba Aratzot, or the Council of the Four Lands. It became an internal self-governing body. Without going into too much detail yet, I will in a few minutes, just understand what it was relative to the Jews and to Poland. The Poles allowed the Jews to govern themselves. Not that they had a mayor and a mayor, a president, anything like that, but they allowed they didn't interfere with Jewish life, and therefore, and because of that, scholarship flourished. This Va'ad Baratzot, which was a self-governing body, again, I keep saying it, but we will talk about it in a few minutes. And between that and the Polish government allowing the Jews time, they didn't meddle. They didn't tell them how to run their country. Their people. They didn't tell them what had to be taught in school. They didn't tell them how their economics had to be run. And not only that, the opposite, they were using Jews for the economic advantage. It enabled Jewish life and Jewish scholarship to flourish to the similar level, let's say, as it did in Spain when you had people like the Ibn Ezra and others we've spoken about. Who are some of these important people? So I'm just going to mention briefly. Obviously, we're going to talk about the Rama much more in a while, tonight or next week, Bezrat Hashem. The Rama was from Krakow, is also he was the main rabbinic authority at that time, this time period. He was, now I'm saying approximately because when he actually died, evidently is subject to multiple opinions. You'd think that it wouldn't be, because it wasn't that long ago. It was only 500 years ago. He was born in 1525. So we're talking literally exactly 500 years ago when he was born, because we're in 2025 now. And he died approximately 40-something years later. I'm saying 40-something because it was close to 50 years, was it 47 years? But when you think about, when we come to his biography and we see at the end everything he wrote, he's mostly known for the Beit Yosef, and I'm sorry, not the Beit Yosef, but he's mostly known for the Rama, his commentary on the Shulchan Aruch. But he wrote tremendous amount more than that, which we'll see. It's amazing what he accomplished in his short life. So that's one man. Another one was known as Rabbi Yaakov Palak, who was before the time of the Rama, also in Krakow. He opened the first yeshiva in Poland. He became the chief rabbi of Poland, and he developed a method of learning Torah, or Talmud, which became very popular for some, and for others, such as myself, very unpopular. And it's called pilpul. Pilpul, you can translate it as like very fine distinction. What does pilpul mean? So you can learn Gemara, Talmud, and I'm going to use a couple fancy words, dialectical reasoning, where you would take a whole topic and every single thing written on it, and back and forth to the nth degree, bringing in all kinds of comparisons and all. By the time you finish going through a sugya, a topic, you either have a tremendous, very broad knowledge of that area, or you're completely confused. I don't like pilpul. Sometimes you'll find commentaries. You just randomly open some of the commentaries on Gemara, and you'll find pages and pages and pages and pages on one topic in tiny little print. How they even had the patience to do all that is not the question. The fact that they had the brilliance to do that, that's beautiful. So he was the one who pretty much in the late, I'd say mid 15th century, he one who developed this idea of pilpul. Rabbi Yehuda Loi, who was also known by a different name, the Maharal of Prague. He wasn't from Poland, but he was very important to Eastern European Jewry. There's a famous legend with him and the golem, that he created a golem, which, sorry to tell you, was debunked many years ago, that it never happened. I've heard, not only did I hear about the Golem, I heard that during World War II, then about Harald Schul, where he supposedly stored the Golem, that the Nazis went in there and they died when they came into the same room as the Golem. Okay, you embellish more and you make more stories, but whatever. In any case, overall, the Jews did fairly well this time period. However, working alongside Polish and Ukrainian Christians who thought Jews killed Jesus, had its downsides here. We know that if you fast forward just a little bit, like into the 1600s, we know, which we'll talk about at some point, Jews and Ukrainians, not a good mix. By the way, up until today, there's a lot of Jewish blood that was shed in Ukraine. In any case, there were many instances of Christians rioting against Jews. Again, in spite of the fact that there was this very beneficent leader and king and this charter and all this welcoming the Jews, and the Jews are involved, they were still rioting in a city called Poznan in 1399, which is a little bit, right around the time of this whole beginning of welcoming the Jews, in quotes. 13 of the elders of the community were accused of stealing property from the church. They were tortured and they were burned at the stake. So evidently the Poles kind of forgot the king's edict. I guess maybe they missed that day in school. Another problem was that since, and this should be, as they say, muvan me'elav, like just self-evident, that is because the Jews worked as administrators and tax collectors on behalf of the Polish feudal lords, didn't make them very popular to the local folks. And therefore, many times they still were the recipients of anti-Semitic rage. And again, very, very common in the country of Ukraine. That happened as well. The bottom line of that is like, well, that sounds like contradictory. Like you said that things are good and then things are not so good. Bottom line is that the Polish nobility might have needed the Jews, but the common Poles did not. And we take a little parenthesis here to just explain how things stay within the DNA of a country. On a trip, I said, to Poland, one of the places I went to was a small town called Jedwabne, spelled with a J, Jedwabne, Jedwabne. What happened in Jedwabne in World War II? It was over 1,000, but I don't remember the exact number, the Jews of the city. It's a small shtetl. All the Jews were herded into a large barn, and they sealed it, and they burned it to the ground. When you go there, you can still see the place of that. You don't see the actual burns, but you see exactly where this place was. But that wasn't the only thing they did. Before they did that, they had many of the Jews were massacred by their Polish neighbors. Even though the Nazis were the ones who were running the show over there, the average Poles went ahead and slaughtered their neighbors. There's a book by a man named Jan Gross, Jan Gross, Jan Gross, called Neighbors. It's a very small book. It's small enough that while I was on the bus ride for a couple hours to the city of Jedwabne, I read the book. It's that small. And it's about how the Polish people, the Germans, the Nazis themselves stood back, and it wasn't any army people, it wasn't any Nazis, it was the neighbors, their own people, who killed their neighbors, the Jews. That hatred, that deep hatred of Jews, goes back centuries to this time period already, till the beginning of the first about the year 1000, approximately. Interestingly enough, and I think I've told this story to some of you, when I was in one of these shtetl, it wasn't Jedwabne, but it was one of those, something like that, where also the entire Jewish community was massacred. We were with a guide who spoke Polish and English, well, not a Jewish person, and happened to see there was this old woman. By the way, this little shtetl looked like it probably looked in the picture on a tefka. Same thing, Fiddler on the Roof. It's one of these, and there were people with the horse and buggies and the old ladies with the babushkas. No, it's exactly like that, like right out of Central Casting. And he sees an old woman in this particular village. And he went over to he said he wanted to ask her to come over and he would translate if she could talk about, because she was like 1,000 years old and she had lived there her whole life, evidently, in this village. She could talk about the Jews of the community. And he came back about 30 seconds later. He was just shaking his head. He said, and we said, like, what? She didn't want to talk to us? No, there's nothing to talk about. She said there were never any Jews in this community. In other words, that not only did they destroy all the Jews, they didn't even want to acknowledge there were Jews ever lived in their community. Now, there's a lot more to talk about when it comes to this time period and what comes after it. But the purpose of this whole introduction is to see how this time period gives birth, in quotes, to somebody who becomes the man known as the Rama, Rabbi Moshe Isserles. So I'm going to come here just a second, go back and share. I like sharing. I'll make it smaller so you can actually see it. Now, I have here that he was from 1530 to 1572. Again, other places say 1525, like I mentioned earlier, that's exactly 500 years ago. 1572 also seems to be not so clear date. But whether it's this date or a different date, he was only in his 40s, basically, according to everybody, when he died. The genius, the massive genius that this man was, is unbelievable. His shul. Now, I remember when I went to his shul. We went to Krakow. In my mind, I pictured tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of Jews living in Krakow because the Rama was there, the big Gadol Hador. Maybe they said maybe there were 10,000 Jews living there. Maybe. So it was a very small community, relatively speaking. He has a shul there, and you can still, I've davened in the Rama shul, it's still daven there, and he's buried there in Krakow. This is, you won't be able to really see much. It's a picture I took of it's a slide I took of a picture of his grave. It says when he died, who he was like the shepherd of Am Yisrael. And again, you can go to the Rama shul, you can go to his grave. Just do yourself a favor, don't spend a single penny there. I'm not coming to this now. Okay, so we'll come back to this slide. But that's who he was. This is like a picture that's available to know what he looked like. Again, we're talking about the ability to really, at that point in history, there was obviously not photography yet, but there was enough drawings of people to know more or less what they look like. By the way, as an aside, many of us have seen for many years what a picture of the Chavetz Chaim is, a couple of famous pictures, and that's actually not really what he looked like. If you take a look, there are very, very few videos available. It's not the word video, but movies of the Chavetz Chaim. But there's one. If I find it, I'll send it out. Where you see there's going to be some conference. I think it was some kind of a conference that you see him and a bunch of other big heavy hitters in the world of Judaism. And there's a video of him. He was a very, very, very short man. By the way, so was Moshe Feinstein, also a very short man. Short in stature, giant in our lives. There isn't a day that goes by anywhere since the Chavetz Chaim or since the Reb Moshe Feinstein. There's not a day that goes by that their names are not mentioned literally thousands and thousands of times. Okay, Rav and Shmuel and Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Gamliel and the people of the Gemara and the Mishnah, of course. But these names, they became part of who we are. You can't think about the idea of Shmirat HaLashon, not speaking Lashon Hara without taking the Chavetz Chaim. You can't think about Psak Halacha, coming to rendering decisions in Halacha, without knowing and thinking about Rav Moshe Feinstein and all of his work as well. So, in any case, he was, let me give you a little bit about background on him, just a little bit before we stop, and then we'll get into much more Bezrat Hashem next week. Again, as he was born in Krakow, some date, I'm not going to say for sure which one, but approximately 1525 to 1530, somewhere in there. I guess his mother had a very long labor of 5 years. His father was a very rich man. We've seen this pattern before, by the way, and we saw it especially in the golden age of Spain, where someone who turned out to be a tremendous gadol and great person in our history and wrote a lot also came from wealth. Why is that important? Because it enabled the family, not to be just scraping by and trying to make ends meet, and the little kid has to go out and work and doesn't have the time to learn Torah. That's very common. The flip side, I'll tell you, let's take someone like Rabbi Ovadia Yosef Zatzal. Rabbi Ovadia was poor when he was growing up. And what he did was he couldn't afford to buy books. He went to the local Sfardim store and he asked for permission to take a book off the shelf, sit in the back, and study it. Well, he had a photographic memory. If you didn't know that, it's pretty obvious when you listen to any videos of him speaking and read any of his writing. Absolute photographic memory. So he would go through the Sfardim very fast and put it back on the shelf. But that's the other end of the spectrum. Again, it's not just the luck of the draw. There's DNA. There's every one of us who's listening now or who will listen later on video knows at least one student you grew up with that, oh my God, every single person in that family is brilliant, right? I know 2 or 3 off the top of my head. Everyone was just a genius. So it is something to do with DNA, not just it's nurture and nature, it's all that other stuff, but having to not worry about money and income was very helpful, because that also meant that they could hire teachers for their children. So his father was rich. He was also very much known as a Talmudist. He was very much into himself a teacher. He was known as a parnas. A parnas is like someone who helped to sustain a community. He was known as the chief of the community. He was a financier. He was a philanthropist. We're talking still about the father of Rama, which therefore enabled him to be able to learn under the rabbi of Lublin, whose name was of Shalom Shachna. If you know anybody named Shalom Shachna as a name, my guess is it's named for him. Eventually, the Rama marries his Rebbe's daughter. So his Rebbe, the Rama's Rebbe, was Reb Shalom Shachna, the chief rabbi of Lublin, and he ends up marrying his daughter. He goes back from Lublin. He goes back to Krakow around 1550, and there's where he starts a yeshiva, and he supported the pupils at his cost, meaning they didn't have to pay a tuition. This is who the Rama was. He came from money. He was using it then to support Torah within his own yeshiva. Does that mean no one paid a tuition? I have no idea. But it was known that he was able to support the yeshiva itself. 3 years later, he's ordained as an official rabbi of 3 dayanim by the rabbinate to form the rabbinate of Krakow. And when there's a plague in 1556, he moves to another city whose name I cannot pronounce. I'll try. Sidlovich, I think that's how it's pronounced. And he writes one of his first works called the Mechir Yayin, which literally means the cost of wine. Turns out it's a commentary on Megillat Esther. Now, what did he do as a young man? He's still a young man at this point. What did he do, and how did he grow, and how did he become this powerhouse? What else did he write? What was the influence? And by the way, what was the Avada Baratzot? I'm going to talk about that. This Council of 4 Lands. He's very involved in that. Bezrat Hashem, that's what we're going to discuss next week on Tuesday night. And if there's anything else that I want to add, we'll do that also Bezrat Hashem next week. In the meantime, have a wonderful evening. Sarot Tovot, and thank you all for being here this evening.